about to call this workshop together. Welcome, overwhelming mission. I'm just thumping it heart deeply. That's wonderful attendance. How wonderful all this. Look, delighted you're here because this is a great workshop opportunity. I think it's very good news at a very good time. Maybe by expanding, next time expand to partial year rather than last month. And maybe we'll have some continuing good news to continue to pour into the evolution of the arts in the city of Dallas. With that, I'm not going to take a lot more time. Oh my God, we should come right in. You're just in time. We're waiting just for you.
Always.
Good to see you. Okay, again, thank you all for being here for this special meeting, special time for us, a special opportunity for us. With that, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Director Ships and let her take us through.
Thank you, Chairman Batiste. Thank you all for coming today. I know we needed to do a special briefing meeting because we have an important thing to consider. And I wanted to make sure we had enough time to discuss it prior to our meeting, our regularly scheduled meeting next Thursday, where we would like to ask for a vote from it. So I was going to walk everybody through the entire proposal, if I might, and then open it up for questions and discussion. There is so much to digest here. And I've had so many meetings with the city attorney that I feel like if we don't do it in sequence, we might grab ourselves into a pretzel like I've done with my brain a few times. Is everyone okay with that? Okay. So without further ado, I think you're all familiar with the City Performance Hall, but just to kind of give you a little bit of background context, it opened in 2012, September, and it was the last major performing arts venue to open on Flora Street. It was built with bond funds and cost approximately $40 million. It serves approximately 50 to 60 different groups a year, so it's the most varied constituency intensive venue and hosts about 230 events. Very, very intensely venue. It's something that I think has exceeded our wildest expectations. Russell Dyer and team run a beautiful shop over there. Many of the tenants of the City Performance Hall are the smaller performing arts organizations that lack a dedicated venue but can fill 400 to 700 seats. So if you think about the assets of the city, we have the Black Box Theaters at Bathhouse Cultural Center, South Dallas, and here, when they make that into a black box. And then we have the Latino Cultural Center, and then this is kind of the next size venue if you're thinking about the different steps. But I also want to note that the Symphony uses the City Performance Hall when they have something like Saluna that can use a smaller venue. So these are broad strokes when I say they're all small groups, but that's by and large who it is. And then the City Performance Hall is owned and operated by the City of Dallas and operated by dedicated OCA staff. The purpose of this briefing is to rename the proposal to rename the City Performance Hall as the Moody Performance Hall in recognition of a $10 million endowment, which will be known as the Moody Fund for the Arts, to be established for the small arts organizations supported by the OCA. I'm going to walk you through some considerations. The material deal points of this proposal were pre-negotiated with the donor, the Moody Foundation, by the AT&T Performing Arts Center. The city staff, myself and Barbara Martinez and David Fisher and Cliff Gillespie and Russell Dyer, have worked to improve the terms of the Moody Fund for the Arts and the naming agreement, but only the naming agreement is a contract with the City of Dallas, and I'll explain more in a minute. The $10 million Moody Fund will be a restricted endowment fund managed by the Dallas Center for the Performing Arts Endowment, Inc. That was the previous name that APPAC had before it got the AT&T gift. All rules governing this fund are called Exhibit A in the grant agreement, which is between the donor and the endowment fund. The gift will be structured as a $1 million per year for 10 years paid to the Moody Fund for the Arts. And if you think about that, this is really key. $1 million would probably give us $40,000 to $50,000 in year one. That's not compelling. So what they have done is worked out a cash flow that will allow us to give out an initial distribution of $100,000 in year one, with individual grants up to $25,000, and then you make it up in subsequent years so that by year 10, the corpus is $10 million and you're able to give away $350,000 to $400,000 a year. The naming will be in perpetuity and conform with the OCA's cultural facilities naming policy adopted by council resolution in March 2006. Perpetuity is the standard, y'all. There's been a lot of emails and questions. The Meyerson's in perpetuity, the Wiley's in perpetuity. People don't give gifts like this unless they're in perpetuity. I think a lot of times people confuse gifts with sponsorships, like a corporate name. AT&T is not in perpetuity. It is a sponsorship. And there's a difference there. Design and construction of new naming marquee signage will be paid for by AT&T Performing Arts Center and approved by the city. Responsibility for signage maintenance will be the responsibility of the city. The naming agreement does not preclude other areas of the building or future additions from being naming opportunities, as long as the overall site is the Moody Performance Hall for all time. So those of you who have been around a while know that there is a long-awaited, long-hoped-for phase 2 of the City Performance Hall envisioned. We could name the Black Box Theater in there. The lobby is not named in there. There are different spaces within today's City Performance Hall and in the future that could be named. And then importantly, and we've gotten this question a lot as a tribute to Russell and team, the day-to-day operations of the hall will not change. So the two most important questions I've gotten from the groups are, how do I get the money? And tell me this won't change my dates. So, the date thing, it's not like you don't have to get the money to get your dates, get more dates if you get money. They're separate. The operations will not change. And then, okay, good, y'all can read that better than I can. The third key consideration is what I've been calling, what can the money go for? And you all are very familiar with our current cultural policy and what we can fund and what we can't fund. And so this list is aiming to be complementary to what we are currently able to do and what we're able not to do. Organizations eligible to apply to the Moody Fund for the Arts are the OCA-supported arts organizations with annual budgets less than $1 million. The Moody Fund for the Arts will provide critical funding for commissions of original works and world premieres, rent abatement at Moody Performance Hall, programs, projects, and exhibitions that address important issues of cultural equity and community access to the arts, and creating cultural experiences in all part of Dallas. That's the money that doesn't have to be spent anywhere near the hall. Artistic collaborations, operating, staff, and marketing support for new initiatives. That's that overhead stuff that the OCA struggles to pay for. Support of production costs and capacity building, more overhead. Hosting artists and residency programs, and other projects deemed important to the vibrancy of arts in the city. That's about as broad as it can get. Priority will be given to works or programs to be held at Moody Performance Hall and or by arts organizations that regularly utilize the venue. And then MFA grants are not eligible to fund debt repayment from prior year's programs, benefits or fundraising events, projects that take place prior to the fund's grant notification dates. This is the way we are currently envisioning running that grant making process. And this slide starts from the bottom and goes up. So let me kind of walk you through it. We are now on April, what is today? 13th. The funding schedule has the first gift made by December 31st of this year. The annual call for submissions would begin in February of 18, closing in mid-March. There would be a 5-person panelist committee to review all grant applications, one of which would be a commissioner appointed by John Paul, or the chairman, and myself, and then 4 other arts advocates. They would do the initial review. The executive committee, which would be the ultimate decision-making body for this fund, would be the director of the Office of Cultural Affairs, a cultural advocate, which would be chosen jointly between the director and the AT&T Performing Arts Center representative. This person is really the agent for the donor. The Moody Fund, because they've had the relationship for years, was this person there, but because we're jointly picking the third vote, that's essentially the tiebreaker. And we are thinking it would be a former commissioner. I think that's been the most discussion, that somebody who's very familiar with what the OCA does, somebody who's seen our allocations process work, understands the way money's given out through the normal OCA process, would be a logical fit here. The executive committee, the legal compliance review are the people that are looking at what the legal documents say this fund, this designated fund for all time has to do, is signing off on where that money is going. That's the check and balance there. And the grants awards right now, that would be done by June. You know, so you'd have 3-4 months in there to do all of that. Governance and oversight. John Paul and I had a long conversation earlier this week, so hopefully I've covered off. This fund is a separate 501c3. It will manage the $10 million gift forever dedicated to the benefit of the OCA-supported small arts organizations. This is per Exhibit A to the grant agreement. This fund is answerable to the Texas State Attorney General and to the Moody Foundation. It will file an IRS 990 form for those of you all who are used to doing due diligence on nonprofits. You have to learn how to read one, but it will detail out what did the fund earn, what did it spend, if we ever had, 20 years from now, a paid staff person, what does that person make, all of that. It will utilize the due diligence process of the OCA to identify the eligible groups. So you all are very familiar with our normal allocation process. To get money from the OCA, a group's got to go through a lot of due diligence and have a lot of things checked off. They're not going to do all of that again. They're going to piggyback on our list, if you will, and say this is our universe of who we will and who will not fund. They will not, though, however, have to adhere to the city policies for what is funded. And so I put in parentheses, if you think through the parts of the cultural funding policy that, love them or hate them, it's the policy we have. Things like funding caps, other funding guidelines. There's lots of rules in there around which groups can get what kind of money. We can't really right now fund staff development and other capacity building things. We can't fund travel. We have a lot of trouble funding artists and residency programs because they include things like per diems and housing allowances. That kind of project, when I first started, the Cultural Vitality Grant Program had been kicked off, and there was an awesome grant that got approved, got through the process for a marketing study. And the city attorneys kicked it back to us and said, you guys buy artistic services, not marketing studies. Well, there's a disconnect there. And so this fund, in theory, could fund a marketing study, whereas the OCA really does, our power alley is artistic services. And then on the reporting end, we'll report annually to both the OCA and the Moody Foundation which organizations applied, who received awards, and for how much. And I feel like those are the key things, because it's kind of interesting if a group is already at their cap for the OCA funding, for example, and we hear from the groups that are, if they get another X amount of money from this fund, it's nice to be able to see that whole picture, and I think that will be important. And then I kind of want to catch everybody else up on the process that we're working towards, because the city's also changed a lot of our internal deadlines for things around agendas, so we've really kind of backed this out. But you're here today, the special briefing. Thank you all, and we have quorum so we can have a discussion. We have a meeting regularly scheduled for next Thursday. It was going to be at City Hall, but we got bumped, so we're back here. But we are going to be asking, pending today's conversation, for a vote to recommend. And the vote is to recommend the naming portion in recognition of the fund, the $10 million fund. That, depending on whether or not we get that, it would need to then go to the next Arts, Culture, and Library Committee meeting on May 15th, and then the council agenda that it's on is May 23rd. So, and I appreciate everybody who's already talked to me about this, talked with some of the APPAC resident organizational people. I know Russell's had a lot of conversations, so I appreciate everybody for bearing with us as we've gotten briefed and smarter on it. Questions, comments? Yes, Roger.
7. Get back to 7.
Okay. There you go.
Okay. When the application is made, is it going to be the same process as regular grant process that we do? In other words, the OCA staff is going to preview it and look at eligibility and all that, or is it going to go straight to that advisory review panel?
It's a private foundation that will have its own panel process. And that's a good point.
Yeah.
You're only eligible to apply because you've gone through that OCA process, but you know, at the end of the day, the OCA has a very prescribed, we have our citizen review panels. That's not, that, you know, these arts advocates are citizens, but it's different.
More questions? Comments? Comments or questions?
I've got a question. I guess mine always comes to the same thing. So, you know, these are sewer road grants are gonna be issued year after year, a lot of times the same organizations. A lot of prerequisites and requirements for the grants, and there's not a lot of teeth behind, you know, those requirements are not being met. Is there something that can be put into this to enforce the requirements or not?
If they do with the money what they say they're gonna do, okay, I'm gonna take that down, because we have not, specifically, I don't believe it's in the documents.
But that would be up to the committee there, right?
It would be, you're right, the
Would
onus
be
would be
their
on this
rules.
private foundation, though, to hold these grant recipients accountable. So it's the reporting and the result, you know, teeth, if you will.
And the executive committee has the power to change the guidelines.
Yes.
Say this, go ahead, sorry.
Well,
John, and I think Jesse, did you, and we'll go on, Todd.
will the funds be, I don't know, will the funds be distributed straight from the foundation or will it go through OCA?
Straight from the foundation. It's a private entity. Yes.
Okay, so, to Maria's point, I thought about that. Like, one of my concerns was that the granting rules could change down the line. And so, yeah, if we could come up with some creative way to put teeth in there. I thought one way was that maybe the granting rules could not change without approval from the commission or something like that, where so that, you know, the city is being assured that, you know, the fund is going to be used for the purpose that it's being, you know, sold as today.
So this came up, and I'm gonna ask Chris or Barbara Martinez from our city attorney's office, who's been really helpful on this. And I'm gonna tell you my understanding, and they can correct me if I'm wrong. So the state attorney general blesses that this entity is set up to serve the public good, which the wording is very specific, small OCA supported arts organizations. That could never change, now, ever. The amount, say the maximum gift of $25,000, that guideline could change. Am I correct, Barbara? That the fine print of what that support looks like can change, but not the intended beneficiary? Chris?
You're right. In the language of the agreement, it says it has to be for small arts groups, and it defines what those are. So that's like written into the agreement. The little things like as it gets more money into the fund, that cap can go up. So those are, you're looking at the little rules and stuff like that. That's what that committee
That's
can
exactly
change.
right.
In terms of making sure, you know, you may find after 2 years, this process needs tweaking. And so that can tweak. But the benefit of this, that it's small groups, that can't change. It has to be small groups.
And that's also, you know, the donor did not want this fund. I've gotten this question a bunch. The donor did not want this fund to go to maintenance for the hall. So, you know, it's a restricted gift. So the idea, you know, we've been asked, can the money go to fix the roof if the roof leaks, or if there's HVAC issues? No. And so that's a good thing. But that is where I think people's fear, when you peel if not small groups, then what or who. It's not going to go to maintenance to take care of things that the city should be taking care of per our regular operational hall. Mr. Sorry.
Let me apologize first, because I'm going to take a few minutes, because I really have some ruminations that I want to share with you. I want to tell you generally that I'm supportive of the effort. I was hesitant upon the initial comment because City Performance Hall, to many in our community, talking to the broader Dallas community, is really the people's home. And the same way, my derivation from that was a friend who served as Attorney General, and he considered himself the people's lawyer. But there was some history that I'm aware of with the Moody's over in Galveston and Houston. And I know of their commitments and their performance. So I, like many of you, have participated in some discussions about what our thoughts are. How can this be sold? How can it be accomplished? And one thing that I did not hear so far today, although I've heard it in passing the last couple of weeks, is the recognition by the Moody's that this money is not to really just add their name to what Flora Street has become, but also to have an impact in the community at large. And I've been corrected in a proper way that programs that might be in effect today might not be in effect next week. But the idea why we have a Neighborhood Plus program, the reason why we have a mayor who stands and talks about articulating underserved districts within our city. So when I first met on this, I inquired about whether or not we could include language in the agreement recognizing what the Moody's have, their motivation for doing the endowment and what they've done historically within our state, but also recognizing that we have a city where unfortunately in many districts feel and are underserved as far as the arts approaching them. It is not only a gift, but unfortunately Flora Street is unknown to hundreds of thousands of our residents in our city. So the idea that we cannot find language to be incorporated in the agreement to make every effort to reach out to entities within identified underserved districts, as they have done with the present council, assuring each council person the justification not only that we have a grand gift, but we recognize as commissioners that we have an obligation to bring dance, to bring visual, to bring theater, to bring jazz, to bring music to the neighborhoods, whether or not it's through the libraries or the rec centers, as we've talked about. So I'm supportive, but I'm asking the minds greater than mine, and there are many, to see if we can come up with language which would allow every council person to say, not only is this a great gift, but ladies and gentlemen and children of my district, I am doing something to bring the arts to you, not where you have to travel down here and pay $15 or $10 for parking. Okay? So thank you for listening to my rumination, and hopefully we can accomplish this.
Are there further ruminations?
Paul, I just need some clarification, okay, because it's, I understand and support, as you know, broadening into communities, okay? But if I understand what you said, then these are to go only to OCA organizations, right?
Yes.
So what would be the mechanism of ensuring that the $10 million came, plus dividing, plus really making strong efforts with underserved people. It's a little hard to think if you carve it up just by council districts, which I'm not sure that's what you meant, but that's how it would come out, okay? How do you make it something like that work, given they're supporting something already?
Can I give an idea?
Sure.
Hypothetically, all right? We go to David. We're here in Latino Cultural Center. We go to David. David's the director of Calamia. We say, David, in addition to your programming that you have at Latino and others, we want you to go into, at this particular library or this particular rec center, and we're going to pay through the funding for the hall, or we're going to invite the children of that district. The districts that I'm talking about, Sylvia, are the districts that are articulated, have already been articulated by the council as being vacant in many cases. So if we have something going on at South Dallas Cultural Center, or we have something going on at Simons, and we have funded, or as I understand, or have funded in the past, okay, through OCA, we can engage the services of bringing those types of activities. So for example, if we have someone applying, an artist, a performer, who gets a grant, well, maybe they can get a grant to go ahead and do a class at a library.
And they could do this, I mean, they could do this, or we could widen the community participation within our group by having one of our groups sponsor one of these ideas.
So that's exactly it, Sylvia. The artist in residency is a great example too.
Right.
We can't fund the artist if, say, they're not an OCA organization, but we can say, you know what, you have a relationship with Teatro Dallas. Why don't you have them apply for this grant to host you in residency, and you guys can propose a project in a neighborhood plus organization, region. Because I think we kind of actually saw this work with Decolonize Dallas. They came to us and said, we will match the artists with venues that are not typical venues. And it worked for the most part. Has it been perfect? No. But you know, the West Dallas Multipurpose Center, I think, is hosting a poetry reading, a block printmaker, and one other group. Redbird Mall hosted the Super Fantasy Mercado with, you know, a dozen artists. So a little bit of it is you got to have a location, an organization, and artists. And the organization might be an OCA organization that can pull the others together. But you got to have an accountable party.
Okay, so, and I don't want to get too
But
much
that's
into
kind of-
the details, but how do we give meat and heft, okay, to that committee who's going to make the decision about for OCA sponsored organizations? How do we then emphasize and find out a way to fund that kind of neighborhood stuff? That's all. How do we do it?
By adding language.
Yeah, and because this group, we've all been together for a while, and there's a pretty strong commitment to expanding who we give to. And this is an opportunity, but how do we do it?
I'm sorry, excuse me, just a second. We'll go to Ms. Stoll, and then we'll go over to Dr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have several questions, but on this point, I was just wondering if maybe you could clarify what role, if any, OCA would have in setting priorities. My understanding is that once the applicants have been identified, that the decision-making process really goes behind a wall, and it will never be revealed, the process by which the deciders reach their decision about who to fund.
The most important, you know, nomination, there's that org chart, sorry, 1 minute, is this panel is chosen by the commission. I I mean, is that the head of the allocations committee? Is that the head of the cultural vitality? Whoever that person is one of 5 voices saying, hey, we know these neighborhood plus neighborhoods didn't have any, luck with our regular allocations process, or they're all at their cap and their programs are full and they're back, whoever this is important. And then the other 2 voices that are chosen by OCA, the director, and it will not always be me, and it's one of those, we're making a decision in perpetuity, and then who the third person is, need to be those voices. It's an important role.
Right, but to the
No.
point, it will not be a public role, like this
It will
meeting.
not be.
That's right, that's
You're
right.
absolutely right.
It will not be a
That's right.
public role.
We call it right on Ms.
Can you go back to the slide that, I don't know what number it was, but where it listed the requirements or yes.
The key
So
consideration.
the priority given to the works or programs held at the performance hall, is that something that we put in, or is that something Moody required?
I think that started on the Moody side.
And I'm just wondering if that,
It's been copied up.
if that negates maybe some of what we're, I guess what I'm asking in the form of a question is more just, what is the rationale behind that? Why, and is it, related or coming from the Moody's, or is that something that we could, work with them on in order to get the neighborhood services?
Keep calling, I guess I was around the table.
Oh, sorry, that's fine, sorry. Okay, we'll follow up and chase it down. I mean, I think my understanding on the intent of that is, that the Moody's want the organizations that are doing things and doing great things in the hall. So, and it's a long list of organizations that use the hall, so the 50 or 60 is a really long list of people who regularly use the hall.
Right.
Yeah,
I understand.
it's pretty universal, but yeah, I agree.
But can that be,
Sure,
Well,
I
yeah,
think you
we're-
do
I'm just
exactly what
taking
you're
notes.
doing right now.
Yeah.
You raise the questions.
That's right, and I'm gonna take notes.
The questions
and
are
run it
gonna be
back.
taken back, and it's still a negotiating process.
That's
It's
right.
not over yet. So
That's
this is the reason we're having this discussion around this table.
That's right.
I think these things can be handled, quite frankly, very quickly and very easily, but what we need to do is
Is
get
get
your
out.
feedback
That's right.
right now. And then this staff has a responsibility of taking those questions back
Mm-hmm.
to this quote-unquote gathering group, along with the city's legal types,
Because I'm not a
along
lawyer.
with the Moody's legal types, in terms of this negotiation.
That's right.
They'll bring those questions and answers hopefully back to you.
That's right.
And with you before this goes, before we give a final vote
That's right.
on document. Okay? All right, further questions? Yes.
Okay, the $10 million, I'd be curious why we need to stagger it over 10 years. Like, is it all available right now?
That's the donor. And they all always come with their payout schedule, and they're proposing $1 million a year payable December 31st every year for 10 years.
And so what are the sort of assurances that the money will be there?
Moody's says.
Yeah, and Moody's has a stellar reputation of paying.
Right.
But if there were something to happen and they wouldn't, obviously, there's a termination clause that the hall is no longer under Moody Farms Hall. And there's this typical language, if they are ultimately convicted of a felony, they would be, you would take it off. I mean, there's all that kind of Enron worst case scenario language that our attorneys have been negotiating.
Okay.
Yeah, I should have pointed that. There is the worst case scenario.
It's a great question.
It's a great question. No, these are good.
Well-
You can't summarize all the documents in slides, but the $10 million payout schedule came from the donor. That is the gift.
Okay. And the articles in the paper also mentioned a separate $12 million gift
Yes.
to APAC. Is that under a similar payout schedule, or is that?
And that's my understanding. I will confirm. You mean, when you say similar payout schedule, a 10-year payout
I mean,
schedule?
is that one being paid up? The $12 million gift to, I'm just going by what was in the paper.
Right.
Is that there were 2 gifts, a $12 million gift to APAC and a $10 million gift to create the Moody's Art Fund that will be paid out in $1 million annual installments.
Yes,
And
it's
so,
right.
what I was just curious of is whether that $12 million gift to APAC is being paid up front or also in installments.
It's over 10 years. I'm 99%
Okay.
sure, Jesse, but let me confirm it.
Okay. And then, last question, Matt. What would you consider to be the market price for naming rights of the City Performance Hall, and have we had any prior offers of naming rights?
Thank you for asking. We have not had any prior offers. There are not people standing in line to name this hall. In 2015, the OCA commissioned a study to look at sponsorship. It's called a Class A sponsorship. Sponsorship valued the name of this hall between $250,000 and $350,000 a year. And a sponsorship would also require a lot more costs that we would maintain. Meaning we've got to maintain those sponsorships. The signage would change, they'd have a ticket request. We would also have to chase down any infringements on the usage of those names. So, for example, if you misuse the AAC in marketing and publication, generally someone's chasing that down, trying to get that done right. This language on the Moody name is very, what I'm understanding, the burden on the city is, if we know you're using it wrong, we correct you. But it's not, lots of penalties. A corporate sponsorship is right for, it gets contentious on the usages. So the 350 is the high ceiling, that was 2015. Obviously, we feel comfortable that in perpetuity this fund will grow and exceed that. And by the way, they never did it. They never sold it, so, yes.
There have been, in the years past, there's been some informal discussion at City Hall, bringing this in less than what the Moody's are putting forward. And just to support, so you understand a lot of the background on the stuff, there was a situation in New York City several years ago where one of the halls was to be named after a particular family. And the gentleman was one of the financiers that was indicted. And that went by the wayside. And then you also had a perpetuity in New York City with the Philharmonic Hall, where they paid the family that it was initially named after back $30 million or something, because Geffen wanted to pay $40 or $50 million to pay for it. The idea in this case is that the Moody's are now coming to us and to the city. And I want to thank whoever made the decision to bring it here, to allow this discussion. I want to thank the chair and I want to thank the director, on that. But the fact of the matter is that there are negotiations going on. And so what our chair has instructed us a few minutes ago is very real. We're here as representatives. We're here advising. We're not making the ultimate decision. But everything that I've heard so far today adds great quality to the offer of the endowment. So we really need to thank not only people that have been working on it here, but we really do need to thank staff over at APAC that actually has been working with the family and bringing this through the process.
Can I say one more thing to Jesse's question?
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. The other question, and there's been a lot of chatter around the $10 million number vis-a-vis the price of the hall, the price of the land. Most of the benchmarks that we're finding of late, not going back to the Meyerson, but kind of the last wave of Arts District buildings, the lead gift name was in the 20 to 25% range, which this is. So the other thing is if we had done the naming out front for a capital campaign, it's been compared to the Winsphere gift. The Winsphere was a much, much larger, more expensive hall. So I just kind of put that out there.
A couple of things with respect to naming rights, and I do think there is a precedent in the city for having them for a term. I'm thinking particularly about the area at Fair Park, once known as Starplex, followed by a series of other names.
Those were sponsorships.
Sponsorships, okay. whether sponsorships or naming rights, correct me if I'm wrong, those are usually extended in consideration for a direct benefit, right? And so there's a contract. We will not have a contract because no consideration is being given directly to the city for these naming rights.
I'm not sure. It's just as fundamentally, the way the naming rights are being, we're naming it in recognition of the establishment of the fund. And I don't know enough about those other deals, so I wanna describe what we're talking about. But what you're talking about sounds like a sponsorship, which usually has a lot more in-trade benefit. So I don't know enough about you know what I mean? All I can talk about is this deal. I'm a little out of my depth when you get into comparing it to other deals.
Again, though, I mean, naming rights usually are not given away for free.
That's right.
Correct?
That's right.
And the city owns the building, manages the building, paid for the building to be erected, and the city will be permanently giving away the naming rights without any direct benefit coming back to the city. That's what I want to establish.
Yes,
And so my guess is that the city attorney, if we have someone here from the city attorney's office, maybe would clarify. Thank you.
Yeah,
Would
Barbara
it
can
even be
clarify that.
possible to have?
It is, city council will have to make a finding that there's a public benefit, and it is a little convoluted because the benefit is not coming to the city, not maintaining the facility, like most arrangements, park facilities. So the council will have to make a finding that there's a public benefit and that setting up the endowment and providing these grants and supporting these organizations, that there are sufficient controls in place to ensure that benefit is met for that period of time with the name rights arrangement and the way this is set up, and that the gift of the naming rights is that we will receive benefit in return for that. So there will be a listing of recitals in the council documents and some findings that have to be made to get to a consideration.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
that was good. Thank you.
Question more. Let Trustee go ahead and get Mr. Stevens.
So would there be a benefit in setting a lower, recommended setting a lower limit to benefits initially when the fund's so low until it gets higher so that it's not forward?
I'm just, so I understand the question, meaning we give out less than $100,000 a year?
No. Less than $25, yeah.
Oh, that's just the ceiling. They can give out, they,
Is that real?
That's what the city should be.
oh.
So forward to benefit?
That's one way to
Yeah,
spread the dollars.
that's one way to spread the dollars.
And then as it, the fund grows to 25.
That's the fund goes.
Lower, okay, I'm just trying to,
Mr. Gonzalez.
Yeah, I wanna be clear on something here. They're saying if a small group, and I wanna use Calumet as an example. They get a funding for this. They have to perform it at that hall.
No.
they do not.
So if I tell them, hey, David, go do it in my district, they can do it.
They can do it. They are an OCA organization with a budget of less than $1 million.
Good question. More questions? Yes, sir.
Can you talk a little bit about how the governance structure evolved throughout the negotiations? Like, has it always been presented to you as, the 5-person advisory panel and then the 3-person executive board? Or has that been negotiated?
David, help me out. The very first time we sat down with the documents and saw the org chart, was there 4 or 5 panels?
I think there was the structure,
The
the
basic
boxes
structure.
were established,
Uh-huh.
but there was some massaging of who was in the boxes.
And trying to understand, what do you mean by arts advocate? And all this is now spelled out. What is a cultural advocate? What does the donor want? And what are we thinking? Defining those has definitely been discussed on 2 or 3 occasions. I'm thinking about the meeting in Joey's office. But those, you know, the general structure and the fact that it's always been a separate fund is from the get-go donor intent.
Is there a reluctance on the part of foundations to directly and normally fund city governments?
Absolutely.
Within my experience, there is. They don't really like to give to cities at all. And so in some ways, whether we like the full way it's come out, it's often unlikely that you can get the money if it's going to go directly to the city. They don't really give them.
So, Sylvia, one of the long conversations we had with the attorneys, there's two, the donor does not want to give this money to the city, and they want this process to be as apolitical as possible. And then secondly, we also don't want this money to be at AT&T because somebody could also trip and fall there too. So you want to protect the money on both sides. You don't want it at the city with a pension liability hanging over it, but you also don't want it in any way something that someone trips and falls at APPAC, they sue APPAC and this money's there. So in both sides, it's got to be segregated and protected, and that has been discussed. And Barbara, feel free to jump in, but that.
Yeah. So I have one more comment. So what I hear from us, which I tend to think this is the guts of our commission, is that we have a really strong and continuous desire to have small, underserved organizations get the majority. And is there anything else that we might be able to do in language that would push that, even though we know that we probably couldn't, get it legally or whatever? I'm not saying this exactly right, but what is it that we can think of to do that goes into writing to push that motivation that we have? Lori?
I don't think I have a response to you. I do think you're kind of getting at a key issue, which is if the city would be giving naming rights away, and there will be a very artful and skilled attempt to link it to an indirect benefit that accrues back to the city that would provide the city council rationale for voting yes. Then theoretically, we're all happy with that. That does still leave a lot of questions about how the money would flow behind the wall, because one of the things that we take such great care with when the money is coming from the city is making sure that it's distributed with an eye toward equity and toward decentralization and toward bringing new voices to the table. I think what would happen here, if I'm hearing correctly, is a priority would be given to organizations that were going to do performances in the Moody Performance Hall. Therefore, priority be given to organizations that are going to be in the arts district, which I think by definition could have ripple effects on some of the small arts organizations that we fund that don't perform in the arts district.
A response or just?
And I think the reality is that you can't get a date at Russell's Hall several months of the year. So when we say a group uses the hall, they're there 2 or 3 days a year. So yes, they perform at the Moody Performance Hall, but I think we were just trying to look at who is eligible for this money, and that's still such a large list that I personally was comfortable with it, but let me kind of go back and look, because we pulled the list of every group under $1 million funded by the OCA through all of our grants. It's a really long list. Well, then the groups that are already kind of upscaled and do the collaborations and the world premieres are already using City Performance Hall. I get why the donor's like, well, let's give them a little bit more to oomph it up, either at City Performance Hall or certainly in the community. So it was never tied to it had to be spent in the hall, ever. That would be too limiting. So I get that, but we can go back and see what the latitude is on that.
So like the Stevie Ray Vaughan artwork in Oak Cliff,
That one probably would not be,
No, that's under public art.
that was public art, yeah, that's
Yeah.
different.
That's separate.
That is different, sorry.
I mean, one almost at that space.
Yeah, that's my point, that's,
Almost at that space.
Totally.
Yeah, you can
Yeah,
tell that
absolutely.
I mean, that's how it works. Mr. Rich, and then Mr. Carroll.
I mean, again, one of the other considerations for the people that are gonna fine tune the document are, and I'm picking my words very carefully here, we should set a goal where a percent of the annual awards go to the groups that have either been funded or recently funded by OCA, but will perform, okay, within those areas of underserved segments of our community. We cannot have quotas, but we can surely ask that consideration be given to setting a goal.
As an OEA, OCA person.
Yes.
What
Yes,
is
ma'am.
the percentage?
Mr. Carroll and then Ms. Ruff.
What's the percentage right now of non-OCA funded groups in the Street Performance Hall? It's pretty small, isn't it? Is there anybody or?
There are a few, in fact, one group moved to Plano, but they still use it a couple of nights a year.
But it's less than 5%, would you say, or?
Wow. Russell Williams is giving us the list.
Yeah.
I'm not, what is the question?
How many of the groups that use the hall, a very, very small part, are not OCA supported? I can think of two.
Yeah, when we're talking about our groups, but we certainly then, if I have holes in the calendar that are available, we might have commercial type things come in. But if you're talking about our, our nonprofit arts organizations, yes, very,
I can think of two.
yeah.
But Russell, what's the percentage of the ours versus, big commercial?
Just the commercial type
Yeah.
thing. Honestly, I'd probably have to look at it.
Because I see remix.
Okay, we'll just get
We'll get
that
that.
and
Yeah.
give that to the commission.
Yeah.
Russell? Further questions?
So I'm wondering if something that we're maybe struggling with is, if this hasn't already been created by Moody, and if it's something that they would be open to, is with our guidance perhaps, but helping them craft some kind of mission statement for what the funding is to be used for, some like guiding principles.
That's that
from us.
exhibit A, and what I'll do is I'm gonna go back and see the flexibility on these points, and do we need to add something up front?
And I don't think it's from the sense that we're directing them on where they should be using their money, but more just from this broader stance of where we, they want to help the city, how does this benefit the city in a way that benefits its citizens, and the same thing, aligned with what we're trying to do with the OCA.
Yeah, this is totally helpful.
Yeah, I think it's all about tone and approach.
Yeah,
I think it was.
And then something too because like you said, the director will change over time, the OCA person will change over time, and you said it yourself too, those are really important roles, so we're putting a lot of emphasis on the individuals in that panel. It's going to go behind closed doors. We want to trust that those people
Share that.
and have that vision and know that for themselves. I think it would be helpful what those guiding principles are that they're trying to serve.
Very, very good. Further questions, I think, George?
So in the light of, the spirit of what we're saying now, that the recommendation of that nature, what about something to add that maybe they try to emphasize different types of performance?
The diversity
The diversity of the programming that they're sponsoring.
I'm going to come at this from the other side and say I'm fine with asking them to consider these things, but much stronger statement I wouldn't support, partly because we can't correct decades of inequity on one white knight riding in on a horse. And it looks to me to be a very generous contribution now, and since arts funding is more or less a zero-sum game, we can now take some of those sums and go somewhere else. So I'm gonna push back a little bit much on the too strongly wording that we'd like them to change their advocacy.
Yeah, it's the look a gift horse in the mouth
Yeah.
to the point.
Further, right here, I go back, we'll come back to Mr. Richard, then go back to you.
I always enjoy it, you know, hearing views. Again, this is said with due respect to the end of the table here. We have an opportunity, and if we don't take the opportunity while we're around this table, then we are not honoring the fiduciary duty that we have. I respect anyone who comes forth with a gift or an idea that will not only benefit themselves, but benefit the city. This will potentially benefit the city. If it's drafted correctly, it will benefit families that have not had the opportunity of having their young kids see a dancer when the child is still 5 or 6, or listen to a voice that takes the child to a different place, or reads a book that the child might not have had the opportunity of getting to a library before. We are not in any way kicking anyone in any part of their body. We are applauding the Moody's. But this is a negotiation, folks. And again, with all deference to the end of the table, we will not do anything to lose it. We will only do those things which will enhance it and enhance the name of the Moody family. Thank you.
Sure, can we go back to the governance slide for a second?
Oh, sorry, there.
So, all of the projects will come to the advisory panel first, and they sort of filter everything through to the executive committee. So the executive committee is only gonna choose from what the advisory panel has put forth, is that
Well,
accurate? Or-
I mean, the way I would think about it, and again, I have our allocations committees, so in my mind, you know, they're implicitly doing a ranking review recommendation, and then it goes to the executive committee, which in our talk would be allocations to commission, right? And that they are the ones saying, okay, our finance people told us we have $425,000 to give away this year. If you draw the line there, you rank the projects, how much money, you know, is that?
Right.
And then within that recommendation, okay, you know what, this group, we're gonna move up, you know, it's that massaging that we kind of always do at the end of the allocations commission vote here, in my mind.
So the advisory panel is making a recommendation to the executive committee, who ultimately will have the final say of.
That's right, and the executive committee is getting a sign off from legal compliance, saying it meets the legal construct of what that fund has been set up to do, per the articles incorporation of that fund. And that's important too, I mean, that's.
Further questions? No, I have just a few.
Yes.
Just very simple ones. I know this has been in process. Will this commission have access to this document
Yes.
prior to the meeting?
Yes.
Could this copy be circulated to them?
Yeah, I was actually gonna put this.
First, right. Second, with that being so, I know you all are just bursting with thoughts and ideas after this great informing, sharing. I would love for you then to get that information back into the staff prior to the commission meeting.
Great.
So there was, at least if there's any opportunity to respond, we can have some responses prepared, and we're able to go to the commission meeting and go further in the process. We really would need to have that.
We'll have it circulated, say, next Wednesday in advance of the commission meeting on Thursday?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Don't we need it before?
I can get it for him,
Well, the agenda we posted.
But this
She's talking
document
about this
here,
document.
Oh, I can share this document tomorrow.
well, great, let's do
Yeah.
that.
Okay, all right.
That's
So,
what we're gonna
the document will be shared
Yeah.
tomorrow.
do. Yeah.
The whole commission, so again, any thoughts that you have, then you need to get those thoughts into the staff as quickly as you possibly can before the commission meeting, because we will not have much more than an hour and a half and probably 2 at best that we will keep to get to the commission meeting. This will give you an opportunity to digest a lot of what you've heard today, which I think has been very good and on point, very thoughtful kinds of questions. I think we still have a lingering one that's about to get in from
I was
Mr.
just asking, could you forward to the timeline of when this all
Oh,
the
yeah,
changes have to be made?
the next
timeline?
meetings, yeah.
Because I know they're on their own, I know, I understand the movies have their own timeline as well, in terms of when they would like to see this executed, so.
Well, and I will say this, actually, this has actually been a compromise, thank you, Mr. Springs. Originally, when we heard about this, they wanted to get this to council in April, which would have negated, yeah, it was something like that, and this meeting was special called, and again, thank you all for coming, but that was the only way we could have people vote at the meeting next Thursday and not feel like it was totally getting rushed. But yes, I mean, this is actually another month beyond what the donor had initially thought was possible, and thank you, this has still felt a little bit like a push, so thank you all for working with us.
Further questions or comments from members? Mr. Rector?
I don't have anything else. I think if y'all have any other questions or comments, you can always reach out as well. And I thank you all. I know this is a big decision and it's a perpetuity kind of one, so let's get it right.
Thank you for your sharing. Thank you for being here. Meeting adjourned.